Okay, we are ready to start our next session. And I have to say, one of the great things about being in your hometown when you do a conference like this is that you have some great, the communities you can rely on who are doing really cool, progressive, creative things. And that's right up here, my friends at Christian Living Communities right here in Denver. Give them a round of applause. So I just have to make a plug. So I used to be a long-term care ombudsman. And so I had the pleasure, yay, thanks, Carol. I had the pleasure of visiting just about every nursing home in the Denver metro area. And I actually, throughout my tenure as an ombudsman, visited all 3 of Christian Living Communities, original communities in Denver. And I was always so impressed because if you talk about an organization that, again, truly believes in the power of community, this is one of them. So I'm so happy to present the team from Christian Living Communities, and I'll turn it over to my friend, Mariah.
Thank you, Penny. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's hear it back. So thank you all for joining us. We are here representing Christian Living Communities, which is a nonprofit organization. As Penny mentioned, we started off with Clermont Park. That's actually the original community, and then expanded to 2 other legacy communities, Summer and Glen, Holly Creek. And then we also have additional communities in the beautiful state of Colorado, as well as other communities that we support outside of the state. So, oh yeah, you're welcome. That's from Summer and Glen. So we wanted to start us off with a little story, which Verna's going to introduce to everybody.
Hi, everybody. First of all, let me acknowledge that powerful story that just happened previous to this presentation. Not only do we live in strange times, but we have to respond in strange ways. And in a way, our story today will overlap that a little bit. But I wanted to acknowledge not only their experience, but the fact that they took from it a compassionate perspective. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And now I'm going to stand up just for the first time because I just realized my socks are too short. Okay. Scenario. You're at work, you're busy, the phone rings. You're told it's an emergency. Can you take 40 residents from another community to stay overnight, to feed them, care for them, and find sufficient beds for them? Inhale, exhale. On the night of December 30th, 2021, that call came in to Clermont Park. One of our sister communities in Broomfield, Colorado, was in the path of a fire, the Marshall Fire. Winds were peaking at 115 miles per hour, and neighborhood after neighborhood was burning down, and they were in its path. So we got this phone call. Clermont literally had to jump into action. And let me just put a couple more layers on this. We're in the holidays now. All of our team members have gone home after a hard day, gone home to their families for the holiday. And this call comes in, and our director, Don Backstrom, has to call them back, our clinical people, our maintenance, our dining people to open the kitchens. The other notable point about all of this that integrated into this strategy is the involvement of our resident leadership. Also, another footnote is Don is coordinating with Jill, our CEO, who has COVID, and Don's just getting over it. So again, we live in strange times. So at 10 p.m., Barbara and Jim over here at the end, our resident leadership, are at the door greeting our visitors. And eventually they will be offering them food, hospitality, compassion, comfort. And this goes on all evening and into the morning hours. Mariah comes in. Keep in mind also that while staff are doing this, maintenance is running around trying to find empty apartments and spaces to put down beds. So it was an interesting evening. The next morning, more residents came down and they were waiting on tables so they could give a full breakfast to our visitors. And did I mention these are 40 people from memory care? So they enjoyed their breakfast, and the good news is they could go home because their community survived. We're going to talk about citizenship. Citizenship enables you to do this. If you know the gifts and the strengths of your team members and your residents, and you regularly work alongside each other, then you can move quickly in an emergency. And not to mention the fact that you can function effectively and in a healthy way in your day-to-day activities. Mariah, go for it.
Awesome story, right? Thank you, Verna. Yeah, let's hear it. So thank you for joining our panel today, and to Verna for setting the stage for our conversation, which is about citizenship. And to start us off, I'd like to introduce you to our panel participants. Over at the end of the row here, we have Jim Laurie, who's a resident of Clermont Park and the outgoing president of the Clermont Park Resident Assembly. He retired in 2008 after serving for 25 years as the executive vice president of the Samaritan Institute, an international network of faith-based counseling centers. Next to Jim, we have Andrew Sharp, one of my favorite peoples. He is the community life director and an Eden educator at Clermont Park currently. Next to him, we have Barbara Methvin, Clermont Park Resident Assembly Vice President, Chair of Conversation Connections Program and Hospice Volunteer at Clermont Park. Next to her, I think everybody knows this face. This is Jill Vitale Awesome. Jill is the president and CEO of Christian Living Communities. She started her work at CLC as the executive director at Clermont Park, where she worked for 5 years. And right here, we've got Verna Cavey. She spent most of her retirement as a resident of Clermont Park, and in those years, supported by her community, she has become an advocate for quality of life for elders. Yeah, give him a hand. Woo-hoo. And what about me? I'm Mariah Bernhardt. I'm the Senior Director of Programs for CLC, Christian Living Communities, and Capella Living Solutions. And I also have ties to Clermont Park. Surprise, surprise, I actually started my career at CLC as the Director of Community Life at Clermont Park and worked there for 7 years. It was an honor and a pleasure. So if I can have you find folks over there, put the slide up, thank you. We wanted to start off by sharing this continuum. How many of you have seen this? Raise your hand. Lots, right? Some. Well, that's great. I want to see if we can ask Jill and Verna to kind of talk us through this, guide us through this concept of the continuum of person-directed and citizenship living.
Great. Thanks, Mariah. So this continuum was created years ago by many culture change pioneers, some of them who are in the room today. And it describes the, I'd say, the journey of the culture of an organization, right? From provider-directed, which is decisions being made by management, most likely in the interest of the institution, the entity itself. A little further along the continuum, you have staff-centered, right? Where team members are consulting residents, putting themselves in resident shoes in order to make the decisions, but the staff are still making those decisions. Then you have person-centered, where really the team members are looking at resident preferences, right? It becomes much more about what the elder wants and needs based on routines and things like that, things we know about the resident. Further along the continuum is person-directed, and that's really about the people that live in our communities making decisions about their own lives, right? Not having a bunch of people saying, I know Verna, and I know what's good for her, right? It's Verna saying, this is what I want for me, and making decisions about how she wants to live her life. And I remember talking with Verna and Mariah about this continuum. They were getting ready to do a presentation, and their presentation was about citizenship. And we said, you know what? This continuum has served us well for many, many years, and it needs to progress, right? Because that's what we do. We keep things moving forward. And what we're going to be talking about today, and the Pioneer Network has actually incorporated citizenship into this continuum, is the model of citizenship, which is really about community. So if we use the example, if I live in a community, yes, I'm making decisions about my own life, but it's not just about me, right? I have responsibility to the whole. I have responsibility to Barbara and Verna and Mariah and everybody else, and we're looking out for each other and making decisions, and we're part of decision-making for the organization and helping to set the course for the future. And we're really excited about talking with all of you about this today because we really think this is where our field needs to go to push things even further. What did I miss, Verna?
You know, I just realized in the last 12 years of my retirement, I have lived from one end of this to the other. And I can tell you, I would rather be on the right side of it. I don't want to go back. And I have to say, just a personal note, I've talked to a lot of people. First of all, this conference is amazing. You people are amazing. It's been a really amazing conference. But some of my conversations are with you who are very progressively minded and frustrated that either your community or your state or your organization is not moving fast enough. And so I want to point out this staff-centered. When I was in provider-directed and things looked pretty gray, I can tell you at times, I did not do well in provider-directed, which was the norm at the time. But one or two staff members really offered hope and opportunity. So if you're out there and you're feeling frustrated, I have to tell you from the bottom of my heart that you are essential by acknowledging residents, by offering them your support and your compassion, and offering them opportunities to grow. Hang in there because you are just so very important to them. And then when I went to Clermont Park, and I have to say that I ran into Penny Cook one day, who I didn't know before. She was working for the state of Colorado. And she said, have you thought about Clermont Park? And I went there, and it was at that time person-centered and beginning resident-directed. And that was just a totally different experience for me. Just to clarify, if you have person-centered, that lays the foundation, and then you can build slowly up from that with resident-directed, and then later into citizenship. And before I forget, Joanne Rader is at this conference this week. She was one of the co-developers of this Continuum and has really given her life to this field, and I want to acknowledge her. And that, and then I met Mariah Bernhardt, who was like a bulldozer. You know, I came from people telling me where to sit and who to sit with, and provider directed. And Mariah saying, you know, I like your ideas. How about if we work together and develop this program? Or, you know, I like your ideas. Why don't we get together and do this conference presentation? And here we are, years later. But my point is, because of these people, I, at my age, growing older, truly have purpose and meaning in my life, and I have my dignity. And I'm grateful for it, that I can move along this continuum.
So we're talking a lot about Clermont Park. So I really wanted to ask Jill if you can tell us a little bit about how Clermont Park started this journey into resident-directed and then moving a little bit closer to citizenship living.
Well, some of us who were there at the time when we made this transformation, we called it the miracle on Clermont Street. Do you remember that, Mariah? When I first joined Clermont Park, it was in a dark place. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of struggles, but we had a bright future. So it's a life plan community, skilled nursing, assisted living, residential living, adult day. And we were on the brink of a big construction project, a redevelopment to totally recreate the campus. We were having a lot of challenges. It was a very segregated community, and by that I mean people who lived in the nursing home stayed in the nursing home. People living in memory support stayed in memory support. And it wasn't because there were bad people there or anything like that, right? It was just the way it was done there. And through this construction project, the goal was to bring this community together and create a vibrant future. The other really special thing about Clermont Park is what we had in existence at the time with skilled nursing, assisted living, memory support, residential living. We have HUD apartment homes on this campus. We have very affordable market rate rentals on this campus. And through this whole process, we were adding life plan apartment homes also, right? Which so that's a different financial model. So people coming in are putting down some pretty significant money to live there. And really, what I started thinking about, so I spent my career, I went to hotel school. And when I started at Clermont Park, I had been working in the field and running the community like a resort, right? This is a hotel. And where really the spark came from is the Eden Alternative Training and coming to conferences like this and learning from people, and Bill Thomas saying, are we looking at ageism? Like, this was back in 2009, right? And I'm like, what is ageism? And what are we doing at this community? And I really started talking. So this isn't all about me. I just want to tell you kind of where I was coming from. Every time I would learn something, I would go back to that community and we would get together with the residents and we'd have learning circles. Hey, I just heard about this thing about ageism and ableism, and why are we ostracizing people living with dementia? And we started having conversations. I'd like to say that from the beginning it was like, and then Mariah coming on board was the beginning of the beginning, but that we said we are going to create a citizenship model. It didn't happen that way. We just started talking to the people that lived in the community and saying, what kind of community do we want this to be? Do we want this to be a place where people are segregated? Do we want this to be a place where people living with dementia don't feel like they belong? And do you think anybody said, yeah, that's the kind of community we want? We want people to not feel like, this is a place. No, people said, this is the kind of community we want to create, and we started creating it together. And, really looking at how do we create a true community and stop with the people that live here are customers, because that disempowers people. And so how do we look at the people that live in this community as citizens? And it was just introducing those things, and then it took off. Mariah and I didn't drive this change. The people that lived in this and worked in this community drove this change. So Mariah, you were there in the beginning. What did I miss in kind of talking about how it started?
I want to emphasize that there was a lot of fear.
Yes.
Expressed by residents and other team members. And as we know, change always kind of ignites some pushback nobody's very eager to embrace change usually.
Well, yeah, and we had people saying, you're never going to be able to create a community where people of different socioeconomic backgrounds can live together and truly be together. Yeah. And we were like, that sounds like a challenge. And so that's really, it's asking the right questions of the people that live and work in the community.
But I will say that one of the biggest insights that I'm very proud that we had was that we recognize it's not just the people who work there that will push this forward, but we really needed to engage resident leaders in this process, and that's, I think, why it was so successful.
Definitely.
So I wanted to also open some questions to all of these amazing panelists. And let's start maybe with Jim and Andrew over there. One of the questions that we had was, what are the roles that you have in the community, and how do you practice citizenship or resident-directed practices yourselves?
Well, my primary role in the community is to serve as the resident assembly president, and that's formally, organizationally, a matter of chairing and supporting a board of officers and committee chairs. And most of the work of the assembly is carried out by those active standing committees and a host of volunteers, and I'll say more about them in a minute. But committees are formed with defined roles like welcoming new residents and staff members, keeping communications open and effective around finances and dining, finding ways to nurture the spiritual welfare and sustainable practices of the community, and also making sure pets are happily integrated. The pet committee has, I think, 11 dogs and cats, plus some other people who are also involved with that. I think what's important for residents and staff members in leadership roles is that we can both support and we can stay out of the way of people who have something valuable to do and want to just get ahead and do it. So at Clermont, for example, there are a group of military veterans, and they visit area schools and tell about their service and speak of the national history that they know very well. We have some Eucharistic ministers who come from a local Catholic parish, and they provide the communion, but they also have a team then of lay people who are residents at Clermont who spend much of the day when they're there doing pastoral care of both other residents and the family members who were there, and often trying to figure out how to manage all that they have with their loved one. We have many people in the community with musical interests. Our star performer is right here. John Elanius is here with us today. The musicians get together in all kinds of formal and informal ways, and the highlight is an annual musical. Things like Oklahoma or Fiddler on the Roof. And last year, the average age of the cast, I think, was 85. And so it is a remarkable experience. And they put this together, and they work for some months on it, and they do performances that are sold out for residents and resident families. And it is a wonderful experience and quite a delight. I'm struck also by someone mentioned flexibility, and it seems to me that's a key part of Clermont is, for example, in the resident musicals, there are also a number of staff members who take part. And residents sometimes have community roles that might look like staff positions. So they help with dining services or manage a community shop. So there's a flexibility in the community in roles that, while that's sometimes complex and I think can be difficult, it also is a wonderful source of openness and vibrancy in the community.
Yeah, great, Jim. I am the director of community life, and I tell a lot of people that I view my job as a facilitator. That's the word that I use because it helps kind of drive the way that I view what I do, the way that other people view what I do as well. So Jim referenced the veterans visiting area high schools, and actually they started going to middle schools this year as well. I just drive the bus. I just tell them when to meet and where we're headed, and I just drive the bus and then sit and enjoy them sharing. When we have the musical, I make sure that spaces are set aside and that everybody kind of knows what's happening. And if you're interested, the August 6th is auditions, so get your stuff together, and we'll see you there. But I guess the other way that I think about it is getting out of the way, which, like, describing it this way, it feels like it sounds like I don't do anything, which I do some things, I promise. But getting out of the way. So when we're talking about another music program, we had a smaller group of kind of a choir that got ready for a July 4th presentation or a concert that they gave. It was awesome, and but the build up to that was a little rocky. So we had a group of people who were really interested in singing. We had lost our choir director, who was a resident, during the year before, and so we didn't have a director. And folks said, we need to get back to singing. And I said, absolutely. And I honestly, John, you might be able to remember better, but I don't remember how we got to the point of one of the members of that group called a friend who was a director, I think that's how it happened, at churches and said, hey, we have a group. We'd love to have you come. And then we got that together. There was a little rocky relationship as that built, and there was misunderstandings about who was in charge and how you speak to, or how you direct, and that this is a resident-directed choir just as much as this is a resident-directed and citizenship model for a community. So they came to me and said, we're butting heads with the director. And I said, well, you better work it out because we have a concert on July 4th. And they did. I gave a few kind of directions to the director to say, hey, let me help reframe where the residents are coming from, and they're going to talk to you a little bit more at the next meeting. They did. Things were smoothed over, and we're hoping for another concert in the future. But that's an example of just how I kind of cleared out of the way, gave a little bit of direction, and made sure that I kept my facilitator role. And in that way, residents were able to step in and say, oh, we got this. Yeah, we're going to do this. And it worked out really well.
Love that, Andrew. Facilitator. Imagine if all of us were facilitators, right? Take away the hierarchy, the titles of director and all that. All we are is partners and facilitators. Love it. Barbara, I also wanted to ask you about your role in the community, and specifically also, you're a pretty big powerhouse in our community. How do you get I know she's looking at me like, no, I'm not. How do you engage other residents and perhaps even associates in sharing their gifts and becoming active citizens in their community?
Over the years, I've discovered that the best way to get someone to say yes to something that you want them to do is to ask them directly. We have several means of communication within the community, and we can throw out a request for volunteers for various activities, and we'll get some response, but it won't be the same response you get when you ask directly. You're usually asking someone because they have a particular skill or gift, and if you tell them that, they're flattered and they can't say no. And of all the people that I've asked in Clermont Park to do various things, no one has ever said no. They see me coming and say, oh no, here she comes, what does she want now? But they say yes. So a direct ask. Everybody wants to participate, and they want to be asked and be included.
Thank you. This question goes to both Andrew and Verna, because you both have either lived or worked in communities that were not person-directed or moving towards a citizenship model. So can you tell us a little bit about how that felt to live in a place that maybe was more provider-directed or staff-directed? How did that influence you? Verna?
Again, to be fair, I was in a provider-directed community when it was the norm, and it was a nice community, as nice goes 12 years ago. However, I did have to bring in my doctor for a medical waiver. I clearly was getting depressed, being told what to do. All the minute details of my life were controlled, except again to acknowledge a couple staff members who gave me hope and opportunity. And the decline, it can happen very fast. I was a college instructor, and I was being treated as not even as a small child. Our children are very confident. They have a lot of freedoms, but it was shameful, really shameful. And when I came, my dignity, so much was restored when I came into this community. And I want to say this very humbly, because it comes from the support of people at CLC and Clermont. And that is, I went from being a person who was totally controlled to a person who was asked and supported to speak internationally at the World Health Organization, Netherlands, and so on, South America, Johns Hopkins. I couldn't have done that without the power of people behind me who cheered me on and who gave me the opportunities, who knew my skills. And that's it. If you know your people, you know their talents, and you see an opportunity that has their name on it, then go for it. Give them that. And let them have the purpose that really steers us into quality of life.
Thanks, Verna, for sharing. So I also started my work in this field in a completely different community, completely different state. And I'm just kind of thinking of examples of the differeces. And it was a community that, it was a building that was very institutional and very staff directed as well. And I guess one example was residents came to me. I was not the executive director, which that would have been helpful. Residents came to me and said, hey, we have no acknowledgement or no understanding, or we're not told when one of our neighbors passes away. And obviously that leads to like, okay, was I even here right? If I do pass away, I want my friends to know. The executive director at the time was convinced that it was a HIPAA issue and we couldn't share, and couldn't be convinced otherwise. And so eventually I directed residents to go talk with her, and nothing happened. But eventually we got to the understanding of, okay, we'll put out a flower at the front desk when someone passes away. And that was it. No indication of who it was. It was like, okay, there's a flower, so we all got to go through the grapevine that's very healthy in this building and figure out who was it that passed away. Which that's just so sad to me, and it just didn't make any sense, and I did not have the power to change that situation. So when I came to CLC and started working at Salmer and Glenn, I realized, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be listening to residents, and if they have a request, especially concerning something as personal as end of life for a friend, then we need to make some changes, and we need to make some decisions with those residents and come up with the best plan. And so when I think about what's done differently within our communities, I think about it as a reciprocal relationship that residents and team share together, where we're listening to one another. We are problem solving together. Oftentimes when someone comes to me with a quote-unquote problem and says, hey, we got to fix this, sometimes they say, hey, you need to fix this, as I shared before, I generally say, okay, how are we going to do it? What do you have in mind? Because you know the situation best. Or if someone says, hey, we need to start this in our community, my next question is, okay, when are you going to start doing that? And then if they don't have that in their mind of like, okay, we're going to start, we kind of help build some things together. I guess one more example of the reciprocal relationship is I find it important as a team member to put myself in a position where I'm learning from residents. And it's pretty easy if you really look around, because folks have so much to offer. But for me, when I first started at Salmer and Glenn, there was a knitting class, and I didn't know how to knit, and I didn't know the folks who were in that group. And so one day I just walked in and sat down and said, hey, somebody teach me how to knit. And it was just such an enjoyable experience. Frustrating at times, for sure, because knitting is something. But it was really the best possible position where I got time to spend with people, had talked about other things other than the work I was doing or the life they were living. It was just life, that we were sharing. And they had that opportunity to teach me something tangible that I was clueless about prior to, and have great respect for now that I've done a little bit of it. So that reciprocal relationship really is important.
Thank you, Andrew. I have another question. I'm just going to open it to the whole panel. But what are some of the obstacles that you've experienced moving from person-directed to a more citizenship approach? Go ahead, Jim.
I'm not sure I moved from one to the other because I've always been at Clermont. But I really see the citizenship model as aspirational, and it's always a work in progress. Yeah. And what I realize is that many of us come in as residents, and we know that at this point in life we have something different to offer in range and intensity than was true earlier or in other settings in our lives. I no longer understand myself as that Alice in Wonderland character who could do or think 6 impossible things before breakfast. I never was that person, but I had fantasies in the past. I don't have those fantasies anymore. And so my experience is that those of us who are residents are dealing with the changes in our lives in many different ways, and they're complicated. And we don't have a roadmap. I wish there was a chart to say, okay, when you hit 80, this is what it's going to look like. I don't know where that is. So I think it's constantly a matter of can we be flexible? Can other people be flexible with us? Our director does a program called the Listening and Learning, and he really does attempt to put the listening first so that he learns, and that's very helpful. So I think that's a major part of getting to that.
I would say one of the biggest challenges is what we all have in our own heads about what it means to be old, right? And if we believe all the things that when you get older, that you have nothing left to give back, you're the whole silver tsunami thing, right? Drain on society. And we're taught that retirement community, senior living is a place where people come and put their feet up, right? And be served. And that's all there is to it. It's really hard to start to make that mind shift, right? And one of the things that was a big aha moment to me was when I realized we say we like to use evidence in this field, but there is no evidence out there that a life of leisure leads to a long and healthy life, right? It's the exact opposite. We need meaningful roles in our lives. We need to have purpose. Asking people when they move in, and I don't know if any of you asked this, what, instead of just talking about, here's all the wonderful things we'll do for you here, what gifts and passions can you bring to this community to make this a better place? Right? And when you ask that, people coming into your communities, we all have internalized ageism, right? And I don't know if you felt this way, Verna, but like some people are like, what? Nobody's ever asked me that before. I'm the age that I am. And so we have to get past, we have to do work around ageism. We have to work on thinking about aging in a different way, people living with different abilities in a different way, people living with dementia, frailty. And then the other big thing is when you're an executive director, it's giving up control, right? And that's a hard thing to do, but it's essential. And I think I'll talk a little bit later about what that's really all about. But you can't have a citizen-directed community if you're like, I'm the general manager and I make all the decisions here. And that's a hard thing to get past, but it's important.
Can I follow up on that? Lately, I've noticed as we're talking about the citizenship model and we're trying to orient people coming in to a different model, they're still very much entrenched in what Jill's saying, that consumer model, that you are my servant, you will wait on me hand and foot. And we've had to do a lot of peer counseling, older residents with newer residents, and say, you know, you don't have to scream and stamp your feet. You just walk in their office, ask them if they want a cup of coffee, and you talk it through, and they're looking at you like, well, that's not the way it works. No, it is the way it works. They will hear you. Not only will they hear you, but they will act on it. And that is quite a surprise. And it's the way we should be. And the other thing is, if you think about it, we're taking a lot of weight off of you guys. I mean, we're helping run the community. And it's a win-win. We have purpose and meaning. We're going to live healthier and longer. And we're helping you out. You carry less of a load. So, it's just, do I sound like a zealot? I'm sorry. It works.
And I should say there are some people that do want that kind of lifestyle of, I just want you to do everything for me. That's great. So people need to pick the community that's the right fit for them, right? But we've found a lot of people. I really haven't found anybody that's like, I just want to sit back and do nothing at all, in my experience.
Well, I would just say the same thing. The barriers at Clermont Park don't exist at the leadership level. They exist within the hearts and minds of the residents. We're socialized, we come in socialized the same way everybody else is, with ageism and ableism. And it's a big leap to leave your home, sometimes of 100 years, into a community. The leadership sometimes likes to compare us to a big family, and there are similarities, but The community life is far more complex. There are a lot more people, and there's therefore a lot more opinions, more ideas to deal with. And you have to learn to accommodate that and then to work with it. And we've learned to give new residents a little space and time. They need time just to unpack their boxes. But they get into the community after some months, and then they're ready to participate. But they have to be eased into that. So we have our own internal barriers, as Verna referred to overcome to be a real active citizen of the community.
Yeah, I'll just follow that. I realized as we talked about this that I came to Clermont with I think like others have, with a kind of unspoken belief that what was happening was I was going to move the life I'd been living into a new location, and there'd be some added benefits of other people taking care of a lot of things like food and maintenance and trees, and that's what would happen. And so it was a real shock to me that, no, that's not, I'm missing big parts of the picture. And I needed to adjust to that. I think two things that have been helpful more recently as we've begun to emerge more from COVID is that we're doing more with what we call an ambassadors program. So we have 17 residents throughout the community, and their role is to help new people get adjusted to this new world that they're in. And they do that in all kinds of different ways. They have meals with them, they take them places, they check in on them, and there's no model for it other than they're trying to connect and say, how can we help you be here in a way that's comfortable to you, and how can we help you be here in a way that contributes to the larger community? And that's been a great gift. The other is that we've had an orientation program, but it's hard to have an orientation if you can't be with other people. So COVID made that very difficult. Now that's beginning to open up, and we're having more activities and programs that help people find out what this fairly complex community is about and what the opportunities are. And that's been very helpful to them.
Yeah, and in terms of barriers, I'd say one of the barriers can be just a fear of a little bit of messiness and complexity as well. Because there's a lot going on, and we are recognizing each individual as an individual who has something different to offer. And that can get messy sometimes when people have different expectations for things. But in time, and with the new expectation of everybody should have an opportunity to offer something new to the community, and we need to not stand in their way. That opens up the opportunity for folks to jump in. And I guess I was just thinking about the executive director, Don, had his listening and learning meeting. We sit in a big circle. There was, 60 or 70 people there on Wednesday. And he said, I've got a number of things to go over today, but first I want to listen and make sure to hear you all out. If there's anything that you all want to talk about today, let's talk about it. And one person raised their hand and said, well, what is Clermont Park doing to combat climate change? and everybody was like, whoa, man. And another person spoke up and said, well, it's all in God's hands. And we were like, well, that's complicated, So there's things that we can, So there's a lot that moment was just complicated. And yes, and they both we all had different thoughts in that moment of like, oh boy, what's going to happen? But we had a short, good conversation and a plan to, hey, let's talk more about that, and a challenge to our sustainability committee, who are very active in the community. And we were able to move on from that and have the rest of the meeting instead of one person blowing up at another but there was kind of an understanding of like, okay, we should talk about that and we should be cognizant of that, and maybe now's not the right time to like totally dive into that. But it was a good exchange. I feel like that was a good example of how messiness can come up, but we cannot be afraid of that, because there is a path forward when we all respect each other's opinions and thoughts and place in the community.
I just want to jump in and just share a little story. A few months ago, we were asked to do a presentation similar like this to another group of people. And they looked at this continuum and they said, but that's so hard to do. And it was pretty interesting, because if you think about it, who says that when you move into a community, another building, another place, you lose your citizenship? Nobody does. So it is a mind frame. It's also how we present things to people when they move into a community. And I also wanted to share, democracy is hard to do, right? And so it might not be the best thing that we know, but what Churchill said, but it's the best model out there. And so when we talk about citizenship, I think it's really important as leaders, as people who work in our communities, to remind and incorporate that not only into the way that you welcome new residents and new people into your communities, but your employees, your family members. Everybody is a citizen, and that doesn't go away if you move to a different place. So, right?
And people have that experience people know community's messy. We all live in neighborhoods, right? And
Right.
But for some reason, it just kind of, you're no longer a citizen. You just, we'll tell you where to sit.
So we talked a little bit about the barriers, and I just wanted to ask you guys, from your experience, what are some of the successful outcomes that you have seen through this, moving from person-directed towards citizenship now? What are the outcomes of that? Jim?
I'll go.
The best outcome is
Barbara.
when an activity or program is conceived by residents, planned by residents, and executed by residents. And we have dozens of activities and programs that we could use as an example. Jim referred to John Elenius. He doesn't just sing and dance. He has a serious side. He read a book about the brain and decided that each chapter would serve as a good discussion. All he had to do was ask Andrew for a date on the calendar, and then he solicited very appropriate people with the right kind of experience to lead the discussions, and that's been very successful. I'm part of a group called SOAR, Sharing from Our Abundant Resources, and we started as a social group, just 2 or 3 of us, but when we got locked down with COVID, and I had to give up my 2 outside volunteering activities, and what am I going to do with myself? So we got together and decided the only thing that we can do to keep us connected to the wider world is to give money. So we started doing research about who we could give our money to, and we chose the women's shelter, and most of our monthly donation, each person in the group gives the same amount, has gone to the women's shelter. But then we got intrigued by some other service groups, and like when Afghanistan occurred and then Ukraine, we just couldn't resist giving money to those groups. And so that's been a really powerful way for us to express ourselves, and this didn't involve staff at all, other than me asking Andrew, could we have this one lounge room every Saturday night to meet. It serves a purpose for us as a social group. We do what all social groups do when they get together, but part of it is doing our research and finding out about who we want to give our money to.
Another piece of that is moving from, are you okay? I don't want to interrupt you. Moving from resident-initiated into collaboration with our team members. For example, and Barbara can speak to this more because she is a volunteer, but we just initiated a hospice volunteer program. You often feel powerless when your neighbors are dying, and now residents are able to be trained to care for friends and neighbors when they're dying. That was initiated first by a small group of residents. Then Jim and Barbara came to that meeting and said, hey, let's open it up to the community. We did, and that started an entire series on death and dying and preparation for, what's the term?
Finishing well.
Finishing well. And so that happened. So we have two things developing out of that. And then I checked in with our director, Don, and I said, are you cool with this? And he said, go for it. And so I assume, Andrew, that there will now be some collaboration with the team as this, because they're going to be going into hospice and so on. So, I mean, there's just...
I don't need to know anything about it at this point.
This is what you call resident-directed. But it's spontaneous, and we kind of check in with leadership, and they say, go for it, and we're off. So it's truly a wonderful thing.
I would add, you know what, when I talked in the beginning about the community being kind of segregated, and years ago it was one of the places where, you know, people would sit together in the dining room and, oh, John, don't sit here, that's saved for Barbara or Jim. And it really wasn't a very, like, welcoming, even though they were really good people. And when we started doing this work around what kind of community do we want to be, well, we want to be a welcoming, warm community. Do we want people who are living with dementia to feel ostracized? Of course not. Do we want people with frailty to feel ostracized? Of course not. Then we started talking about, well, what behaviors either are keeping that kind of thing going, and what behaviors would start to shift things. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I think what we were really doing is creating norms in the community. And that, to me, so anywhere you go, there's norms at this conference, right? There's things that you know you're supposed to do in order to be accepted and be part of something. You don't butt in line in front of people, shove people out of the way, whatever it might be, right? You come in on time to sit in a conference. You try not to fall asleep during a session, whatever it is, there's norms. And when you really start to build community, those norms are created, and the executive director no longer has to try to fix everything. People don't come to you and say, well, so-and-so was just rude to somebody else, or this is happening, because people correct each other. Hey, we don't do that here. Let me tell you about why. Let me tell you about our inclusive community. And that, to me, was so, I mean, I just really, I used to think, well, let's write a policy about bullying. That doesn't work, right? It's creating norms that help people understand how we should act with each other and our accountability to each other. That's one of the biggest outcomes I see, is it really started to shift things for everyone, including me, right? I wasn't getting pulled into everything because I couldn't fix it anyway.
I think one of the things in this is that I think there's an expectation in the citizenship model, and certainly an expectation at Clermont, that there is a good place for everybody. What we have to do together is figure that out, and sometimes that's easier than others. But one thing strikes me, because it happened to me this week, it was about our gardening. In the gardening, there are all kinds of levels, so that Jill and her compadres probably deal with a lot of budget issues about how much can be devoted to landscaping at the different communities. And they set a budget, and they do some major tasks, like nobody else has a dump truck that they can bring in all the mulch that we need, but that comes in somehow. But we also have a resident, a former hospital administrator, and he spends many hours and much thought in coordination with the building director, designing and managing almost all the landscaping at Clermont. So that's an important role. and a singular role for him. There's a whole host of residents who do the planting of the plants when they come, and they do the watering of the plants, and a number of them have their area, their turf, which they're the ones who water that. Don't water my area, I'll water that because I'm doing it the right way. And so they're very invested. Last week, I was looking out my window and I saw a resident in her wheelchair, her motorized wheelchair, and she seemed to be just stalled on the sidewalk by the roses. And I kind of wondered what was going on. She just sat there, and she seemed very intent. And I went to do something else, and I came back, and it took me some time to realize, and I saw her at a different place, but she was still just as intent. And I finally realized what she was doing is she was looking for the Japanese beetles on the roses, and every time she saw one, she plucked it off and put it in a bucket. She was doing that in the area she could reach from the sidewalk. Somebody else needs to do it in the second row. But I thought, yeah, that's a good indication of Clermont, that everybody has a place. Some people are up at this level, and some people are getting the beetles out, and we need that.
And finally, I wanted to bring this question up to Jill. How does the role of a leader change when moving toward a model of citizenship?
So if you think about what a mayor's job is, and that's how I look at, if you're an executive director or you're a department director or whatever your job is, think of yourself as a mayor, a community builder. And a mayor has two jobs. My dad used to be the mayor of our little town back east. Mayor has two jobs. One is to provide infrastructure, and two is to build the social fabric of the community and bring out the best in everyone, right? The mayor doesn't make everybody do what they're supposed to do, and if you really start thinking that way, what does it mean to be a community builder? You can really start to shift your leadership style and really start to drive change and make things happen. There's a couple really great books if you're interested in those concepts. Peter Block is an amazing author and community builder. He's got a website and several books out there. I would start there. He's also got some, I think, videos on his website. But dig into what does it mean to be a community builder, right? That's what it's all about. And the other thing I would say is your job is not to have the right answers. Your job is to ask the right questions, right? When you start asking questions like, what kind of community do we want this to be? It changes everything. Or what talents could you bring to this community? You start to change the way people are thinking about their own roles. So come up with those right questions and ask those questions.
Thank you. Jim, I just wanted to ask you if you can close our session, and then we're going to open up some time for Q&A.
I just want to say that clearly we are Clermont Park enthusiasts sitting on here. And it is a great place to live, and I hope it's a good place to work. But we always have a lot more to learn. So I want to ask you that I hope you'll continue to look at what are the best qualities and practices in your communities and find ways to share those with the rest of us so we can all live more fully into a good model for these places we inhabit. And say thank you for being with us.
So we have just about 5 or 6 minutes, and we just wanted to open up to any questions or stories or perspectives that you'd like to share.
Would anybody like to comment? Quite over here. There's one over here.
Thank you all. This was really inspiring, and it's also made me a little sad because I have my mother in a community that is very unhealthy, and I have several clients in the same community, and so I appreciate the reference to Peter Block, but it seems so overwhelming, and I've tried to talk with the administrator about a few things, and he will not budge, and they don't welcome anybody when anybody comes. They don't let the community know when somebody has passed. My mother is continuously saying, there's ambulances here all the time. I know people are leaving. I wish I had a chance to do something about it. And earlier in the conference, somebody did talk about the grieving process within their community. And there's no newsletter. There's little communication. So I'm kind of at the point where, I mean, this is kind of my mom's only option at this point, but I wish I could just pull her out. I can't, so I'm just really looking for suggestions. And I love the last point that, look at the best qualities and practices in your community, and there have to be some. So maybe if I started with that instead of just complaining about all the things that I would like people to change, that might make a big difference. Thank you.
Does anyone want to have any comments on that? I'm sorry that you're having that situation.
If I could say, find an ally. Is there anyone in the community that can align with you or assist you or sympathize with you? Have you found anyone? Oh, sometimes you have to begin as a support group and develop power that way. Right. Volunteer. Yeah, that's a really get in there. Get your hands dirty. And the other thing is, I went to, in our case, we had a wonderful aging group in the state of Colorado. And guess who was the social worker 12 years ago? Her name was Penny Cook. And she got me into Clermont Park. So there's somebody there for you. You may have to dig and dig, but I was saved by just persisting till I found a good soul.
And maybe,
Yeah, Penny, you've said, and I want to plug your book, and I hope everyone, you talk about this progression, again, of where we have come from. But one of the things that struck me, as you said, we have to look at ourselves as in those leadership roles, what our perceptions are about aging, and that sense of community. Could you talk a little bit more about that? You've reflected that, but we bring our own kind of frozen attitudes in some ways, I think, about the building that sense of community.
So it's a little bit hard to hear up here with so is the question a little bit more about addressing kind of our own beliefs about aging as leaders?
When we come into these roles as a CEO or whatever, I mean, we start with ourselves.
Yes.
I think is what you have said.
Yes. Yeah, I think that it is absolutely critical. I mean, we have our own issues about our own aging journey, right? Is there anybody that doesn't have their own worries about aging? Stand up, please, because I'd like to have you counsel me. But we have all these things that we believe about older people, right? And we have all these things that we believe about our own aging journey. And it really impacts the way we do our work. And there's a really great assessment. And if anybody's interested, get me your email address and I can send it to you. It was created by Dr. Tracy Gendron. She's got a new book out called Ageism Unmasked. And it's a really, really great book. But what this assessment does is, so if you work in aging services, you probably think, well, I'm not ageist because I like being around older people. And that is one part of the picture, right? So that is what we believe about older people themselves, if you're a younger person. But there's also what you believe about your own personal aging. And so this assessment has you go through and really kind of look at, what do I think my own old age will look like? And then the third component is called relational aging. How do I think I'll be treated when I get older? And when we've done these surveys in our communities with team members and residents, and you always find that, and hopefully this is the case, that people that work in this field think very highly of older people, but they've got issues about their own aging journey, and they have issues about how they think they'll be treated when they get older. And those things all really come into play. So we've really got to dig into this ourselves, because there's a saying that it's hard to fight an enemy that has an outpost in your own head, right? And that's what the situation is with what we believe about aging. So we've got to start doing our own work. I think a really simple thing to do, you could do it yourself or do it with some people you're here at the conference with, is say, for the next week, the next day, even the next hour, I'm going to pay attention to all the ageist messages that are out there, right? I'm going to look, when I'm looking at advertisements, what am I seeing? Am I seeing anti-aging things? When I hear, and this is not to shame anybody in this room, but I hear this all the time at conferences where people are like, I don't want to admit I've been in this field for 30 years, because that means I'm old, right? So we are getting these messages all the time. When I say own it. So the next time you say, I've been in this field for 30, 20 years, own it proudly, right? It means you are older and you have experience. But pay attention to all those messages that you're getting out there, and then start talking about it. Start thinking about it. Think about when you go to buy a birthday card at the grocery store for your friend, your aunt, whoever it might be. Because one of the things that researchers have found is awareness is the key to addressing it and starting to reduce those ageist tendencies. And I would just say it's a journey. So I don't know if that answered your question, or if anybody else wants to, has any thoughts? All right. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
One last question or comment? Oh my goodness, there's 2 people.
So it's a two-part question. So for the organization that's straggling somewhere between person-centered, person-directed, what would be the one thing they should do next to get them closer to citizenship? And second question, what's next for you guys?
I have to think about it. I know. She's like, you talk about it. We need to think about it. A lot of us shifted back, right? We talk about a continuum. So how many of you guys shifted back to provider-directed during COVID? Pretty much everybody, okay? Because we were told from the top, you have to do this, right? You have to lock it down. You can't have people coming in. Yeah. And so here's the honest truth is, we're building up back to person-directed, because we have lived in provider and staff-centered for 2+ years now, right? So one of the things that we really intentionally did, and Andrew and I worked on this together, also with Jill, was to start what we call warming the soil, right? Eden language. We started bringing Eden education back to our communities, and that really opened possibilities for our team members. Our Eden education includes residents as well, because they're leaders in the community. And that, I would say, is one big thing that really helped us defrost and start moving towards a person-directed and now citizenship model.
And I'd say, just to add on to that, maybe a next step would be challenge residents. Bring them, maybe identify resident leaders, or just residents in general, and have conversations with them to say, hey, this is what we're shooting for. How do you see us all making that happen? What are some of the barriers that you see in place right now that we got to overcome? And help them, or give them the chance to identify some of the issues that might be in the way, and then give them the opportunity to help be a problem solver or a solution builder. So
That's what I was going to say too. Is I would, if it were me, I'd go back and say, here's what I learned at this conference, and here's what my question is: how do we get there? And that's where the magic's going to happen. So,
a message to the leadership in all of the facilities that you represent. You're thinking, as Andrew has to think every day, how do I encourage, how do I get these residents to participate? And since COVID, how do we just get them out of their room? one of these days, Andrew's going to say, oh my gosh, I'm in charge of a herd of wild horses, because residents will finally be in a position to do that at Clermont Park. So I hope that that can happen in all of the facilities.
Yes, the communities. That's what's next? It was your next question. And I'd say we would all agree we haven't yet arrived. And if we sit here and say like, oh, we're the experts and we have it all figured out, we're wrong and we're lying to you. But the thing is that we go in and we're in the community each day and we live in the community thinking, how can we keep plugging forward? How can we keep moving forward, and what's in our way, and how do we break that down? So continually asking the question, how can we grow? How can we get better? Is what's next in my mind.
Because I just want to say, culture change is not a destination, it's a journey, right? Thank you so much to the team from Clermont Park and CLC.